White America didn't respect the Honorable Elijah Muhammad because they liked him. They respected him because they feared what he represented: organized, disciplined Black power that refused to beg, negotiate, or back down. Let me tell you something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad commanded respect from the same white power structure that was lynching Black men, bombing Black churches, and sicking dogs on Black children. And it wasn't because he was asking nicely, it was because he built something they couldn't ignore, couldn't infiltrate easily, and definitely couldn't intimidate. That's power, real power. Born Elijah Robert Poole in Georgia in 1897, the man who would become the Honorable Elijah Muhammad grew up in the belly of Jim Crow. His father was a sharecropper and Baptist minister. Young Elijah saw firsthand what subservience got Black folks: nothing but broken backs and broken spirits. By the time he migrated to Detroit during the Great Migration in 1923, he'd already witnessed 3 lynchings. That does something to a man's psychology. It either breaks you or it crystallizes your understanding of what's required to survive and thrive in a hostile environment. When he met Wallace Fard Muhammad in 1931, Elijah Poole found his purpose. Fard was teaching that Black people were the original people, that we had been stripped of our true identity, and that we needed to reclaim our dignity, our discipline, and our economic independence. This wasn't just religion. This was applied psychology, cultural rehabilitation, and economic strategy wrapped in spiritual language. Elijah recognized the genius immediately. After Fard's mysterious disappearance in 1934, Elijah Muhammad took the reins of what would become the Nation of Islam. And here's where the story gets interesting for anyone studying power dynamics. He didn't inherit a movement. He built one from the ground up using the most broken material America had to offer: drug addicts, alcoholics, criminals, the jobless, the hopeless, the men and women that society had written off completely. The transformation process was systematic and brilliant. First, he gave them identity. You're not a Negro. You're an Asiatic Black man, part of the original people. That psychological reframe alone is powerful. You take someone who's been told they're 3/5 of a human and you tell them they're descended from kings and builders of civilizations. That's the foundation of self-respect. Second, he gave them discipline. The nation's program was strict: no drugs, no alcohol, no tobacco, no fornication, no profanity, no gambling, clean diet, mostly no pork, regular prayer. These weren't just religious rules. These were the building blocks of self-control. You can't lead yourself, let alone your community, if you can't control your own appetites and impulses. Elijah Muhammad understood what modern psychologists now know: discipline creates confidence, confidence creates competence, and competence creates respect. Third, and this is crucial, he gave them economic purpose. The nation emphasized Black economic independence. Buy Black, build Black businesses, create jobs for Black people. They opened restaurants, bakeries, farms, grocery stores, and schools. Muhammad preached what he called the knowledge of self and others. Know yourself, but also know how the economic game works. Don't just spend money in your community, circulate it. This was sophisticated economic strategy dressed in religious doctrine. But here's what made white America sit up and take notice: the fruit of Islam. The FOI was Elijah Muhammad's security force, but it was so much more than that. These were the brothers who had been transformed from street hustlers, addicts, and criminals into disciplined, trained, impeccably dressed soldiers. They stood at attention in temples. They provided security at events. They patrolled Black neighborhoods. And nobody messed with them. Not the mob, not racist thugs. Not even the police felt comfortable stepping to the FOI without serious backup. Why? Let me break down the psychology and strategy at play. First, the FOI represented unified force. White power structures, including organized crime, respect organization and unity. When you've got dozens or hundreds of Black men moving with military precision, wearing suits, taking orders from a central command, and willing to protect their own at any cost, that's a force multiplier. It's not about individual toughness. It's about collective action, and collective action is what power respects. Second, the FOI brothers had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Many of them came from the streets. They knew violence intimately, but now they had been given purpose, structure, and a cause greater than themselves. That makes them exponentially more dangerous than random criminals. A man with discipline and purpose who's also fearless, that's someone you don't provoke casually. The mob, which controlled much of the vice trade in black neighborhoods, knew that the nation wasn't trying to take over their operations, but they also knew that the FOI would respond with overwhelming force to any disrespect or violation of nation members or interests. There's a famous story about Malcolm X when he was still Detroit Red before his transformation. Once he became Minister Malcolm representing the nation, even his old criminal associates knew he was untouchable. That protection came from Elijah Muhammad's organization. Racist groups and individuals also knew better than to target Nation of Islam temples or members the way they targeted civil rights churches and activists. Why? Because the nation made it clear, we will defend ourselves by any means necessary. This wasn't the turn-the-other-cheek Christianity that white supremacists were used to exploiting. This was, you hit us, we hit back harder. That's a different calculation entirely. The psychological warfare was masterful too. While other Black organizations were begging for integration and acceptance, Elijah Muhammad was preaching separation and self-sufficiency. He told Black people, we don't need them to like us, we need to build for ourselves. That flipped the script entirely. Suddenly, white approval wasn't the goal. That's threatening to a power structure that relies on being the center of everyone's universe. White America, particularly the power establishment, recognized that Elijah Muhammad was doing something unprecedented. He was taking the so-called dregs of society and turning them into disciplined, economically active, proud Black men and women who weren't asking permission for anything. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover certainly took notice, which is why they surveilled the nation extensively. But surveillance and respect aren't mutually exclusive. They watched because they had to respect the threat level. Here's the business lesson, the strategic takeaway. Elijah Muhammad built a brand. The Nation of Islam brand meant discipline, self-respect, economic independence, and the credible threat of self-defense. Every member was a walking advertisement for that brand. The clean-cut appearance, the respectful but firm demeanor, the economic activity, all of it reinforced the message. This is what organized Black excellence looks like, and we're not interested in your approval. The mainstream civil rights movement was fighting for a seat at the table. Elijah Muhammad was building his own table, his own restaurants, his own economy. Both approaches had merit, but only one made the power structure worry about obsolescence. Let's talk about local community leadership. The nation's mosques weren't just religious spaces. They were community centers, economic hubs, and organizing bases. The ministers and FOI captains became genuine leaders because they were solving real problems. Feeding people, creating jobs, stopping drug dealers from destroying neighborhoods, giving young Black men alternative paths besides crime or subservience. When you can walk into a neighborhood that the police have written off, that social services have abandoned, and you can restore order, create businesses, and transform lives, you've demonstrated leadership that transcends official titles. The white power structure might not have liked it, but they had to acknowledge it was effective. This is why Elijah Muhammad's model still matters today. He proved that you don't need permission to build power. You need vision, discipline, organization, and the courage to operate outside traditional approval systems. He showed that the most broken among us can become the strongest when given identity, purpose, and structure. The respect white America gave Elijah Muhammad was grudging. It was often hostile, but it was real. They respected him the way you respect a competitor who's playing the game at a high level, even if you're rooting against them. They respected him because he built something that worked, that couldn't be easily destroyed, and that didn't require their validation to exist. That's the ultimate power move, building something so substantial, so organized, so effective that even your enemies have to acknowledge it. Not because they want to, but because reality forces them to. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad understood human nature at its core. He knew that people, all people, respect strength, organization, and results. He knew that begging for respect gets you nowhere, but commanding it through action and discipline forces recognition. He knew that you can't free a people by asking their oppressors nicely. You free people by giving them the tools to free themselves, self-knowledge, economic power, and the will to defend what they've built. That's the legacy. That's why the FOI could walk through any neighborhood untouched. That's why the mob didn't test them. That's why even racist power structures had to factor the Nation of Islam into their calculations. You don't have to like someone to respect their power, and Elijah Muhammad built power that couldn't be ignored.